XPath is a combination of two words, XML and path. It can be easily understood as a path to find target elements within XML or HTML documents. There is no use wondering why it's so powerful and useful for web scraping. XPath helps you to deal with incorrect data, inaccurate pagination, endless loop, and so on. As a query language, it needs to be understood, to be learned, to be practiced. I cannot practice it for you, but I can teach you the keys to make your learning a little faster. My name is François. I'm not a developer, but I have been learning web scraping for the past 2 years. And because I am still a bit of a beginner, you will learn things from scratch. You will learn how to read a HTML document, what the different categories of XPath are, and which one to choose depending on the circumstances. Then you will discover the cheat sheet, meaning the different XPaths you will be able to write. Finally, you will be able to use your XPaths for web scraping through a tool named Octoparse. Before we begin, if you have any trouble understanding my very French accent, bonjour, je voudrais une baguette pas trop cuite s'il vous plaît. You can turn the subtitles on. You can also check the timecode and the Octoparse downloading link in the description. Here is a website designed for web scraping. You can easily access the corresponding HTML document by hitting the F12 key, or you can simply do a right click and click on Inspect. HTML has different levels of element, just like a tree structure. If we assume that this is a level 1, it means that it's a level 2, that it's level 3, 3, 3, 3, then 4, 5, and so on. If you are having trouble understanding how it works, think about how we go about finding a particular file on our computer. So this is an HTML element. An HTML element consists of a start tag and an end tag. And text with angle brackets is called a tag. The start tag is div and the end tag is div2. If we take another example, here the start tag is here, it's A, and the end tag is just here. A bit more difficult. This one, the start tag is div and the end tag is just located here. It's also div. These tags have a meaning. I don't know them all, but for example, an A tag represents a URL, a H1 tag entails a title, an img tag implies an image, and each element is divided into different components. And you can find up to 4 components. First of all, you've got the tag, the start tag and the end tag. Secondly, there is the attribute. The tricky thing is that you can have 0, 1 or multiple attributes. For example, in this element, we have 1 attribute, but for that one, we have 2 attributes. And the first attribute is always next to the start tag. In that case, the first attribute is href and the second attribute is style. And we can know that because they share the same color. And an attribute usually comes in pair with a value. In that case, the value is always written between 2 quotation marks. If we take the same element as an example, the value of the attribute href is a slash. And the value of the attribute style is text decoration none. Last, there is the text content. It's the only element which is also visible to the internet user. We can see here that it's written the word as we have created it is a process of our thinking, blah blah blah, which is the same text as the one we can see on our screen. Now let's figure out how all of these elements are related to one another. When an HTML element is contained within an element, the element that contains the other element is called the parent. Let's take an example. This element has a parent. This parent is that element. Same thing for that one. they share the same parent. And same thing for the last one. They all share the same parent, which is div class quote. So the contained element or the contained elements are children of the parent, which means that each element has one parent, but they can have 0, 1, or multiple children. Finally, elements that have the same parent are called siblings. All three elements are siblings. They are all children of the element div class quote, which also implies that this element is a parent of all of these. Now let's say a word regarding the different kinds of XPaths. To begin with, I'm going to show you something specific. Let's take an element as an example. As you can see, if I click on the three dots, I can copy, and I can copy the XPath, or I can copy the full XPath. And I'm going to explain you why you should never ever click on one of them. In order to specify the location of an element, XPath uses slash to connect the different tags from the top to the bottom. Which means if we want to select this item, it will be something like /HTML, /body, and /div. Something like that, div1. And we will be able to select that element. So far, so good. And this is what we call an absolute XPath. However, an absolute XPath can quickly become a lot trickier, because if we want to select this element instead, the absolute XPath will be something like this, and it's way longer. Let's be honest, this XPath looks weird. We should rename Absolute XPath by long and confusing XPath. So by clicking on copy path or copy full XPath, you will be able to automatically write an Absolute XPath, and you will almost never use an Absolute XPath for web scraping. But what do we have to use instead? We have to use the short XPath. The short XPath uses a double slash instead of a single slash to reference the element we want to start the XPath with. As a result, if we want to select this element, we can write something like this: double slash span, and we add a couple more details, and we will be able to select this element, among other things. It looks better than the previous one. In overall, as I will explain it further later in the video, we can combine the double slash and the single slash depending on the situation. So if I want to select this element, I can start with the parent, so something like this. Then I create a single slash, double slash at the beginning, but a single slash to select the following tag, and I select the first span, just like this. So a single slash stands for selecting the direct child, whereas a double slash means that we select an element below it, what we call a descendant. In this part, you are going to learn the list of XPaths. I tried to categorize them in order to make your learning as easy as possible. Another thing is that if you want to verify your XPath the same way as I do, you can use the XPath helper, which is a Chrome extension. The first use is a bit tricky. You may need to reload your pages, but otherwise it's a great tool. Let's start with the tag selectors. And the first XPath you're gonna learn is double slash followed by the tag. Let's assume I want to target this element, which is an H1 element. This element only has a start tag and an end tag, doesn't have any attribute, so I can simply type //h1 and it should do the job. There is one element selected. I can also do another way. I can use a double slash plus a tag 1 followed by a single slash and a tag 2, which will means we will directly jump into the tag 1, then we select the direct child, which is the tag 2. If I still want to select the h1 element, I can see that the parent is a div element with a div tag. I can therefore type //div /h1, and it's the very same thing. You can do the same thing, but you replace the single slash by a double slash. If you want no longer to select a direct child, but you want to select a descendant, so I can simply type /h1 and I will end up with the same result. Finally, there is something specific. If I type / plus an asterisk, I will be able to get all the elements of my HTML code, because asterisk means everything. So I'm selecting all the elements based on their tags. What about the attribute and the value selectors? Let's assume I want to select the image container elements, meaning all the images from the first page. I can write //tag. I start with the tag of the element, but it's not accurate enough, so I can mention the attribute. In that case, I will create square brackets, which means I create a condition. I type @ is always followed by an attribute, and the attribute is class. So I write class. It's not accurate enough, so what should we do? We should also mention the value, and the value is image container. Not image container highlight, because we currently select the element, but only image container. In that case, I type equal, I insert square brackets, and I type image container. And it's more accurate. I only have access to 20 elements. And if I want to select the link of the image, I write /a, because it is the direct child. Let's take something a bit more difficult. What about if we want to select the rating? As you can see, we have an element with a p tag, an attribute of class, and a value of star rating 3. So I can write something like this. /p at the attribute plus the value, but I will only have access to 3 elements. And we have 20 books on the page. And indeed, there is something wrong. It's because the value is 3, because the rating is 3 out of 5. But if we select the following rating, it's star rating 1, then it's star rating 4, and so on. So what should I do? If I want to select all the ratings, no matter of what the rating is. In that case, I can use this kind of XPath. I still start with the tag, which is p, then I create my condition. And my condition is that I select elements which contains an attribute between parentheses, so at class, plus a part of the value. There is something common between all the values, which is the text star rating. So if I type star rating, I will be able to get all 20 elements. I can also replace contains by starts with if I want to. In that case, it means that the value has to start with this text. Last but not least, you can also write ends with, which is the same thing, but the value has to end with this text. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with XPath Helper, and it doesn't work with Octoparse either. So I just want to tell you that it's a valid XPath, but because it's an updated version of XPath, I believe, it may not work depending on the circumstances. I selected the first book, so I ended up with the detail page, and now we're going to talk about the text selectors. It's paramount to remember this kind of XPath because you will use it quite often. Let's assume I want to select the availability text. In that case, it's a bit tricky because there is no much info, only a tag. So I can do /th, but that's not accurate enough. I have 7 elements instead of a single one. If I want to select availability, I can say that I want the text which is equal to availability, which is the reason why I'm going to use this XPath. I create a condition. The condition will be equal to text, I open and I close the parentheses, equal to availability. I can do the same thing but with a contains text instead. If I want to select the price, I can do th text equal and 51 pound and stuff, and I will be able to select two elements. Let's say it's fine for the example, but let's assume I want to select the element which contains the pound sign. In that case, I will create a contains condition. I open and I close the parentheses, and I'm going to say contains text, comma, and contains the pound sign. So something like this. And I open and close the parentheses. There is something wrong, it's because I didn't close the last parenthesis. And now I've got three elements. Each of these elements contains a pound sign. And same thing as we have seen previously, I can replace the contains element by a starts with element. Unfortunately, for the text kind of XPath, it seems that the ends with doesn't exist. Order selectors. The order selectors mainly work if the elements you want to target are all siblings, which is the case of our table. If you take a look, you can see that all the TR elements are siblings of the parent T body. Now let's assume I want to select the first line. I can say that I want to target a TR element, but I want to target the first one. So here is my order indicator. Then if I want to select only this element, I can create a direct child, so slash td, and it should do the job. Now if I want to select no longer the first one but the last one, no matter of how many elements, how many siblings there are, I can replace one by last and I will get the number of reviews. If I want to select not the last one but the last minus one, so this row instead, I can do last minus one. A bit trickier. What about if I want to select all the rows from my table but the first one? In that case, I can say that I want to select all the TR elements with a position which is greater than 1. And it doesn't work because I have to open and close the parentheses. And in that case, I have 6 elements. Of course, I can replace this sign by that one. In that case, I'm selecting the first 2 TR element. I want to end up with something a bit specific. What about if I want to select the first element which contains a pound sign? Here it's a bit different. Why? It's because this element is not a sibling of this element or that one or the last one. So the process will be slightly different. I'm gonna write the XPath as usual. So we want to target a p tag which contains a text with a pound sign. So here it is, only the pound sign. I close, and there it is. And it's not as I expected, so I'm going to replace the p tag by an asterisk. In that case, I have 4 elements. Let's assume I want to select the first one. I cannot do something like this. What I have to do instead is to open and close a parenthesis, and I insert my XPath between these parentheses. Then I write an order indicator, and I should be able to select the first one, or the second one, or the third one, or the last one. The sibling selectors are also very important selectors you have to remember. They are particularly useful if you want to target a variable text next to a static text. Let me explain this part. Okay, let's take an example. Let's assume I want to select the books text. The books text is a sibling of the text product type. So what I'm going to write is an XPath with a text which is equal to product type. Then I select the following sibling, which is books. So let's do this one. I select a th element with a text which is equal to product type. Then I select the following sibling, so slash following sibling dot 2 times. Then I write the tag of the sibling. In that case, it's td. And if I want to select the following sibling, the first one, I simply type another selector. In that case, it doesn't matter because there is only a single sibling, so no matter what you do, you will only get one element. You can also select the preceding sibling, which is the same thing but backward. This is a kind of XPath you will rarely use. The following sibling is much frequent. But let's assume I want to select the poetry text based on this element. So I select this element based on that one. As you can notice, this is an li element with an attribute of class and a value of active. I write it this way and I select the preceding sibling. So slash preceding sibling and with the tag of the preceding sibling, which is li. As you can see, I've got 3 elements. If I want to select the first one, 1, the second one, 2, the third one, 3, and so on. What about the parent selectors? Let's assume we start with this element, with this XPath. So we should be able to write something like th with a text which is equal to upc, and I want to select the element table. So I want to select the parent, and the parent. If I want to select the parent of an element, I type slash and 2 dots, and I'm able to select this element. As you can notice, it's now highlight. It has a value of xh highlight, which means it has been selected by the XPath helper. I repeat the same process over time, and I only have access to one element, and this element is a table element. I can also directly select the ancestor, meaning I no longer need to repeat the same process 3 times. In that case, I still write a slash. I type ancestor or self, 2 columns, and I write the tag of the element, which is table. The child selectors. What I mean by child selectors are specific selectors which contain one or multiple children. Let's come back to our listing page and let's assume I want to select the article tag. I can write /article and I will get 20 elements. If I add my condition and I add an asterisk, it means that I want to select an article element, multiple articles element, which have at least one child, which is the case here. It also means that if we select another element, for instance, this element, which doesn't have any child, I will type something like this. I've got 20 elements, but if I add my previous condition, I will no longer select these elements because my condition is no longer valid. Let's come back to our article elements. I can also specify the tag of my child. So I can say P and it will work because indeed, if we take a look at the article element, I've got a P child just here. These 2 selectors are a bit specific. This is one of the first time I've seen them, so I hope I will be able to explain them to you in a clear way. I want to select the entire element, the element which contains all 20 elements. So I've got a section, I've got an OL element. That's great. I can say that I want to select an OL element which contains an LI element, or to be much more specific, 20 LI elements, which are all children of the OL element. And I will get the OL element because the OL element indeed has got 20 LI tags. But if I want to select a descendant and no longer a direct child, for instance, I want to select the article elements, which is below it, it will no longer work. In that case, I have to add a double slash. Finally, let's say a word regarding the operator selectors. Meaning, we can create a XPath with a combination of factors. We can create two conditions, a condition 1 and condition 2. We can say, I want to select this condition or the other one. We can select an element with a value which is different from the one we have mentioned. Same thing with numeric values. We can say we want to select everything but not the XPath with the condition we have specified. And we can end up with selecting two XPaths at the same time. So let's jump into it. Let's assume I want to select this warning element. As you can notice, this element has two attributes and two values. So I can say something like div my condition at, I'm going to copy and paste this one, it will be faster. With a single attribute and a single value, it should do the job, but I can perfectly create a condition 2 and I type and plus the other attribute and the other value. I don't forget to add the at and it still works. I can replace the and by an or, meaning I will select this condition or that one or both at the same time. Let's come back to our listing page and let's assume I want to select all the ratings but not the 1-star rating. So I'm going to write this XPath, I /p, attribute this one, but I want to create a different from sign. And I've got 54 elements, which is way too much. Maybe I can create an AND condition. So AND, and it will be something like contains at class and star rating. Et voila! It sounds good to me. As I've mentioned it, there is also the XPath for numeric values. To be honest, you don't need to remember that one. I just want to show you an example thanks to ChatGPT, but it's really a unique case that you will almost never see. What can we do next? We can write the same XPath, but with the not condition. I do a p tag with a condition. This will be a not condition, and this one is a bit tricky. I have to add contains plus another parenthesis, and I want to select everything but not with a star rating 1. So it's at class, comma, star rating, and I've got 54 elements, so if I want to still select the rating but not the 1-star rating, I will add the and contains at, you get the idea, star rating. This is another way of writing the very same XPath. That's actually a pretty good exercise because you can write different XPaths and still end up with the same result. Et voila! Finally, I can write two XPaths at the same time. So let's change things a little bit. I want to select the ratings, but only the 4 stars and the 5 stars rating. So that shouldn't be too complicated. Here is an example of a 5 stars rating. So here we go. This is the first one. /p. You get used to it. I write this kind of indicator. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it in English. And same thing with the star rating 4. And we've got 8 elements. It sounds correct. Now we're going to find out how to write XPath from scratch for web scraping. We are not going to code, we are not going to use Python, but Octoparse instead. Let's dive into how to write XPaths for pagination, for loop items, and for extract data steps. Before we begin, I should remind you the difference between a short XPath and an absolute/long XPath. Actually, there is something specific related to Octoparse. The definition of an absolute XPath for Octoparse is different from the one we have talked about previously. There is a small change. Octoparse draws a parallel between absolute XPaths and relative ones. Absolute XPath is used when you want to extract data from the web page directly, and relative XPath is used when we want to extract data from a loop item. It means that in Octoparse, an absolute XPath can be short, can be concise, and can be formatted the same way as a short XPath. Now let's see how we can create our own workflow thanks to Octoparse. We are going to create a pagination, a loop item from scratch, and we're going to select a single element, which will be the title of the book from the detail page. So let's jump into it. I copy my URL, I paste it here, and I click on Start. The first thing we are going to do, as we have said, is a pagination. The pagination is a loop. So I add a step, I create a new loop. This loop will be renamed to pagination, and I'm going to select a single element. The reason is that the pagination is always the same element. We have to click on the next page button each time in order to go from one page to another one. We are looking for an A element because an A represents a URL, as we have mentioned it at the beginning of the video. We can proceed in different ways. I'm going to start with the LI element. It will be something like this. I always verify my XPath thanks to XPath helper. I've got one element and I select the direct child, which has an A tag. I end up with this. I copy my XPath, I paste it here. I'm going to add a bit of timeout here, and the element is selected. Now I'm going to click on it. I click on the element. I'm going to call it click to paginate, and here it is, the difference between an absolute and a relative XPath. In that case, we are targeting a relative XPath because it's relative to the XPath we have written for the pagination. I click on relative XPath to the loop item. I'm going to wait before action, and I'm going to load the page with Ajax with a timeout of 10 seconds. Maybe I will create another video in order to explain to you the usefulness of Ajax. And if we click on pagination and click to paginate, we should be able to end up with the page 2. So as you can notice, the pagination works. We have succeeded. Congratulations. Now we can create our loop item. When I say loop item, we hear the word loop, which means we have to create another loop which will be located between the pagination and the click to paginate button. This one is a bit more specific. We are going to select variable list as a loop mode, which makes sense because we are looking for a list of elements, and we are going to write to XPath which targets all 20 books from the page. Here it's pretty straightforward because each book has an article tag. Let's try that one. I've got 20 elements. There we go. Now I have to do something else. I have to click on the URL in order to go to the detail page for each element. So I'm going to write a relative XPath to the loop item, to this XPath. So let's see if I type /A, I've got 40 elements and I expect only 20 elements. So let's try to be more specific. So /article /h3 maybe, right, and /a. Okay, so this is a loop item. I select a descendant with an h3 tag, and I select a direct child with an a tag, and I've got 20 elements, which is good. In other words, I select this part of the XPath, and I'm going to add another click item, which is relative to the loop item. I paste my XPath, I click on apply, and let me check something. Okay, I have to select open in a new tab. Let's check it out. Here we go. And now we select the title, which is, I'm pretty sure of that, an H1 element. So I add an extract data step. I click on add custom field, capture data on the page. I write my XPath here, not /a, sorry, /h1, and I name my field, which will be title. I confirm, I add the small timeout, and I click on run. And we are just going to figure out together whether the workflow we have just created works. And it sounds good to me. It's going to script each element every 3 seconds. This is the end of the video. I hope you have enjoyed it. If it's the case, you can give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you want to script B2B leads, you can also click the link in the description. Finally, if you want to get any kind of web scraping services, you can ask me for a quote by sending me an email. See you next time.